My home, to me, represents a place of peace and tranquility, and a place of security, a place where I can absolutely unravel from whatever the world has put upon my backs, upon my shoulders.
The stained glass is the first thing that we see first and foremost. When you drive up and park your car, the stained glass is popping out at you. And from the stained glass, you enter into the home, and the stained glass is just that wow factor. But then the artwork on the wall is that super wow factor that you just say, wow, this is our house? I'm like, okay, we're doing pretty good. Whereas when my children's friends come by and they like, this is like a museum. I've never seen this much artwork. Then you realize, okay, we might be doing something correct.
When I walk through the door, my home says I'm home. But more importantly, not only to me does it say that, it says that to all who come here. Many a time, our friends and family have commented that this home is very homey, and is that there's a good balance between how we've laid the house out in relationship to the artwork. The artwork has increased over the years, but it does not dominate the house. So when you come in, it's like, wow, you got a lot of art. As opposed to when you come in, it says welcome. That this is what, our home represents, is our experience.
One of our pieces we have is done by an 83-year-old by the name of Sylvester Sims. And it's just a woman's back with a rose. But that figurative piece says a lot when you walk into our living room. It's very impactful. So much so that my husband was buying it, and I had no idea he was buying it because the man had already told me that he was going to give me some lovely pieces without purchasing or paying a dime. But this person was writing out a really big check. I'll let him tell that part.
Well, she was looking at the pieces that he was giving her, and I was looking at the piece that was up against the wall. I spotted, and I said, I got to have that.
The centerpiece of my collection, early on, was Joyce Owens's Writers on the Roof. It still is, but as I've grown in my collecting experience and being introduced to new artists, I would put right next to Joyce Owens the two pieces that were created by Ted Feaster, the stained glass artist who created My Lady Sings the Blues series. The piano scene, and then the scene in the restroom where she has fought with her man to get to her drugs. And we titled that one, Is It Worth It? The poignancy and the relevancy of that scene and that image to be put into stained glass gives it a permanency and relevancy in terms of posing the question, is it worth it, being relevant to today with our youth and our society in terms of the choices that people make?
They're all exciting to me, I mean, I look at Bob Dilworth's Black Cows, and I remember when in 87, when I saw that, I just knew I wanted a part of that, I want a piece of that series. And it was the landscape. It was, you could get lost in the landscape, The Jonathan Green piece, Blue Lady on Orange Chair. That's the strong image in the foreground, but in the background, when you look, in all of the shadows, they're chambers of other women, other experience, they're pregnant images, they're other experience yet to be had in consciousness.
I started to collect because as I viewed the world and as I was moving through it, I wasn't seeing images that reflected or included me and mine. And so as I graduated from college and started to, have my own space, I was looking to have images in my home that reinforced who I was as a person of color. And those things were few and far between, so you had to depend on getting, posters, or you had, landscape or floral images. But rarely was I running across those kind of images that reinforced me, that I would want reflected in my home, and more importantly, to be reflected in my office, working in corporate America. In corporate America, you get to see, the corporate art collections, and, they get to reinforce, the majority culture. But I wasn't seeing that as being accessible, or feeling comfortable if I had found it to bring that kind of artwork into my office in the corporate environment. So as I began to discover black art in America, I was really able to, I coveted those pieces because they were few and far between. You'd run into them at street fairs, or, or in happenstance situations, or in poster art. But through Diaspora Rhythms, I've been able to learn about the artists, and grow in the knowledge of these artists and their particular styles and how they represent the world from their point of view, and include those in my collection.
I could say the one that started it all, Heidi Lane. Is that one?
Heidi Lane started it for far as, yeah, it
Far as
did.
collecting.
Far as
I mean,
collecting, but I
Because when I
think,
look at it, I think, wow, that's,
Right.
wow. I mean, we might have had some before then, but that's the point where I think of actually thinking that's when it started.
and one other piece for us, Lowell Thompson's Boy on the Bus. The original piece was something that was so breathtaking, but the cost was also breathtaking. So we had to figure out how we could get Boy on the Bus, but not at the cost and at the rate that Lowell wants to sell it for. So we were able to secure a piece, a G Clay Boy on the Bus, and we paid a nice amount of money for it. And I think that was the beginning of us being serious collectors. Because no way I would have thought we would have saved money for a piece like that, but we did. And that started it off, and we've had the bug ever since.
I hadn't always thought about, actually hadn't thought about being a collector at all, come to think of it. There are certain artists I wanted to have a piece of them and a piece of the experience. The artists that I've gotten to know, or early on, there was already a friendship, a relationship, a consciousness shared.
We never thought about it. And see, since we had such a large house, the artwork was scattered through the house, so you didn't see that much together. And he told me how much I had, and we had to go back around the house and count the artwork and said, oh, you're right. Had no idea. And that's what we talk to a lot of people about, because a lot of people don't realize they are collectors. They buy a little artwork, they buy some for this room, for that room, something they like to look at, give them deep thought, different reasons, but they don't realize they're collectors. And what we try to do is let people know about the various artists in the community, because once you see how many in the community and start looking at their work, oh, they want their work in your house.
When Patrick McCoy told me I was a collector is when I knew I was a collector. An artist friend of mine I was hosting a reception for him to sell his art, and he had made a contact with Chevette Williams. And so I was able to meet in one day Chevette Williams, Robert Williams, Dan Parker, and Patrick McCoy, because they came to my home to see the artist's work. And so as they moved and looked around my home, Patrick saw my Joyce Owens, Writers on the Roof, and he commented and said, oh, so this is where this is. Unbeknownst to me, I didn't know it was quote unquote missing, but it was here. And so anyway, he comes to me and he says, you're a collector. And I said, I am? I said, oh, because I was just going and getting images to positively reinforce my family and myself, to be encouraged as we walk through that door to go out and face the world. And it was through his looking at what we had gathered and assembled in terms of the artwork at the time, he said I was a collector. And from that moment, I would say my life changed.
It was 2005 approximately, and I'd been asked to do something with Diaspora Rhythms, and I was not a member at that time, but I was asked to do something with them, and I did. Um, and I loved the fact that I was involved with this art group, a group of artists, but these were also collectors. But I never thought that my collection, or what I was collecting, could even compare to the Daniel Parkers or the James James Parker, Patrick McCoy, and some of the other collectors that I've known. I just didn't think that what I had, could compare. And mind you, I didn't have a number of the pieces that I have now either, So it wasn't necessarily, as I said, one of those firework moments, but what it was a subtle, a gentle acceptance.
I would describe our collection as being a figurative collection. A figurative collection meaning that we collect bodies, faces, things that you can make out. We have some abstract, but we're more drawn to faces. And in that, we also are drawn to certain colors, at least I am. You'll see some of the pieces that I have a lot of blue in it. I'm drawn to blue, and that just calms my spirit and makes me feel good.
My collection includes figurative, landscape, some African art, some African sculpture. I believe it's an eclectic mix of the African diaspora. And I think that's as a result of moving through the world, and the world comes to Chicago for the most part. You discover things at the African Fest, you discover things, at some of the wonderful art dealers and entrepreneurs that have, developed in the community. And also by having studio visits, with the artists that are accessible to us throughout our community.
I surround myself with works that speak to me. And it's not necessarily in the manner in which the Susan Clenard piece does, but because only in talking to her did I get that story out to that piece, because I was like everybody else. I just saw it as a grandmother with a child, or an older woman with a child. And people had walked by it for years, she said, and no one found an interest in it. And so she gave me the story. But that's not what I see when I look at that piece. And I find that interesting. I see tenderness, and love, and maybe in a sense responsibility.
Everything's expanding for me, and to the point where I was in some abstracts. I like more abstracts now than I ever did before. Just the whole aspect, the whole knowledge of art has just grown tremendous.
There's an excitement when I'm out with other members and we're at a show and it's the hunt of the collecting, it's the moment, of watching what other people are doing. And not that we're collecting the same things, but sometimes people lunge at the same piece, But the role is the curious question for me, because that implies that there's a responsibility. And personally, for me, the work is not about a responsibility other than maintaining it.
a very large impact and influence that Diaspora Rhythm has on all of us as collectors and members is the process that we go through the Collectors Invitational. So we've been exposed to artists, we've learned about these artists, we've started to purchase these artists' works, we've expanded our collection, which is, ties into our mission. But it doesn't stop there. We then take a moment to then come together as an organization to look at who we've interacted with and raise some questions about who's doing cutting edge work, who's most impactful, and you have these the criteria by which we evaluate the artists that we've encountered, and then we vote out of our collections and identify 5 artists that we feel we need to promote and expose to the community. Through that collector's invitational process, and I've been exposed to about 3 or 4 of them now, we have now culminated that process in our 10th year, whereby we're now having an exhibition at the Logan Art Center at the University of Chicago, where we will be exhibiting all 19 artists that have been honored through our collector's invitational process this fall. Through that collection, you will see, from the collector's perspective, these artists' work in various stages of their career at the time that they were honored, and I think it's going to put together a most unique exhibition for the community at the Logan Art Center.